Welcome to today's Training Tuesday. Today, our topics are going to be, of course, our updates and reminders. Then we're going to cover communications and pre-submission conference before getting into our additional training opportunities and end with our Explore More. Updates and reminders. So the end of the calendar year is approaching very quickly. We only have 78 calendar days until we celebrate entering a new year. If you have procurements tied to the end of the fiscal year, you will want to assure that those are being worked on now. And of course, communicate with your APO and SPO about those end of calendar year procurements that are needing to get done. Communications. So, CPO Notice 2024.10 provides guidance on how small purchases may be conducted. Agencies with designation may contact a single actively registered Illinois small business under $20,000 to contract for supplies and services. Those procurements over 20,000 must utilize bid buy and provide all small businesses the opportunity to respond to the agency's published needs. If the small purchase has emergency conditions, then the agency should conduct as much competition as possible, but may communicate with vendors prior to routing for approvals. If the small purchase has sole source conditions, the agency may contact the vendor to gain pricing and availability information prior to routing for approvals. If the agency is utilizing the emergency procurement method, the agency shall utilize as much competition as is possible or practicable under the circumstances, and agencies shall use best efforts to include contractors certified under the Business Enterprise Program in the agency's emergency procurement process. This is per Section 20-30 of the Procurement Code. Agencies may communicate with a sole source vendor prior to routing for approvals. If you don't, you will potentially have inaccurate information on the sole source justification form as to the pricing or even the scope that can't be corrected after the CPO's approval has been given. Therefore, it is necessary as part of the sole source process to communicate with your vendor prior to the publication. For a competitive procurement, which would include IFBs and RFPs, we are not allowed to individually communicate with vendors prior to or during the procurement process. All communication for a competitive procurement must be completed by using bid buy so that it is part of the published record and procurement file. So, when does a procurement communication need to be reported? Well, when there are any written or oral communication received by a state employee who, by the nature of his or her duties, has the authority to participate personally and substantially in the decision to award a state contract, and that imparts or requests material information or makes a material argument regarding potential action concerning an active procurement matter, including but not limited to an application, a contract, or a project, shall be reported to the Procurement Policy Board. Section 50-39 of the Code defines material argument as a communication that a reasonable person would believe was made for the purpose of influencing a decision relating to a procurement matter. It also states that reports shall be entered within 30 days of the communication and that communications regarding change orders or renewals must be reported. There are some communications that do not require you to report. Those may include statements made in a public forum, statements regarding procedure and practice, statements made by a state employee to an agency head, other agency employees, EEC employees, other agency employee involved in the procurement, unsolicited communications providing general information, responses to solicitations including requests for information, clarifications regarding a solicitation so long as there is no competitive advantage to the person or business and that the questions and answers are posted in BidBuy. If you've had a communication and you are unsure if it should be reported, you will need to contact your ethics officer. If you need help finding out who your ethics officer is, you can search for them on the EEC's website as linked on this screen. Please remember that whether or not it is a reportable communication to the PPB, it is still a communication that must be included in the procurement file. Let's also discuss pre-submission conferences. Pre-submission conferences are utilized to convey or highlight information that the vendor needs to be aware of when responding to a solicitation. Per the rules 1.2005W, the conference shall be held long enough after the solicitation has been issued to allow potential vendors to become familiar with it and sufficiently before solicitation opening to allow consideration by vendors of pre-submission conference results in preparing their responses. Dependent on the solicitation, there may be times that it is necessary for a mandatory pre-submission conference to be held. However, this may lead to unnecessarily restricting vendors. Non-mandatory allows all vendors to provide a response to the solicitation regardless of pre-submission conference attendance. It is vital to the procurement to include a mandatory pre-submission conference. If it is, please assure that your solicitation is clear that any late arrivals or early departures will result in the vendor being deemed non-responsive. Per CPO Notice 2020.03, agencies are required to utilize our pre-submission conference sign-in. On the pre-submission conference sign-in sheet, you will need to enter the solicitation-specific information on the first section of page 1, being shown here on the left side of the page. All vendors must be accounted for at the pre-submission conference. This sign-in sheet must be completed regardless of or if the conference is virtual or on-site. And this sign-in must be completed regardless if it is mandatory or non-mandatory. So, if you have elected to have a pre-submission conference, this completed sign-in must be included in your procurement file. Additionally, if no vendors show up to your conference, this should still have the information and the agency should be putting no vendors attended and still include it on your procurement file, because if it's mandatory, we still need that in there to show why you're canceling it if you're showing that no one showed up to the pre-submission conference. Even if it's non-mandatory, we still need to show that it was held and no one attended. Still important regardless. What should be discussed at the conference? The due date and time. It's really important to make sure to emphasize when the due date and time is. Also, to discourage vendors from waiting until the day of the opening to submit bids. Some files may take more time to upload based on the vendor's system configuration or internet limitations. The state is not responsible for their system configurations and will not accept late bids. And you should also go over the overview of the solicitation. In addition to what we just covered, you may want to additionally discuss any specific details that the agency wants to emphasize that were published with the solicitation. The BEP goal and details regarding the process. Also, take vendor questions. You should provide answers to questions as possible. If you don't know the answer to the question or can't point to the section in the solicitation document, you should document the question and assure that it is published with the Q&A following the pre-submission conference. State the solicitation stands as published unless an amendment is published in bid by. You can also show or provide the vendor submission video. We have two vendor submission walkthrough videos. One is for responding to RFPs and the other is for responding to IFBs. Both can be found on the CPOGS website in the Procurement Resource Library within the Vendor Resources folder. Showing these videos is not a mandatory requirement, but we encourage you to at least provide the link for the vendors to watch on their own. Things to remember. Please recall that pre-submission conference sign-in sheets are a requirement and must be included in the procurement file. If you hold a conference and the bid is canceled, you must still attach the pre-conference sign-in sheet for the procurement file. If you have a pre-submission conference and no vendors attend, you still need to have the pre-submission conference sign-in sheet attached to the procurement file, because it will still show the state staff that was available for the pre-submission conference and show a record of no attendance. Timing is very important as well. Do not hold a conference too close to the bid due date. This may not allow vendors adequate time to finalize their bid or proposal after the conference has concluded, especially if they are waiting on the state to publish the finalized questions and answers as the bid amendment. There shall not be any individualized conversations at a bid conference. This means that when you have vendors in person, you can't have side conversations with a single vendor. Additionally, there must be a set published date and time for vendors to attend. It is not allowable to host vendors on an individual or requested basis, as this may have the perception of bias even if it is not intentional. If you are needing to show conditions of a location, please consider sharing photos, diagrams, blueprints, or other attachments on BidBuy to allow vendors that are unable to attend a non-mandatory pre-submission conference to still obtain information that the agency notes as important. Again, thanks for joining us today. You can find some additional training on our website. We offer our BidBuy training 24/7. Those are on-demand recorded information for you. In addition to that, we have our 6 instructor-led courses: Introduction to Illinois Procurement, Specifications, Financial Disclosures, Procurement Methods Small Purchase, Understanding and Applying the C2D Evaluation, and Procurement Methods Invitation for Bid. We look forward to having you there at those trainings. Please make sure to register so that you can attend. All right, so explore more. The White Pines Forest State Park has the southernmost stand of virgin white pine trees east of the Mississippi River, creating a unique and serene natural environment. Its striking landscape features large pine trees, limestone bluffs, and babbling streams. The park is popular for hiking along scenic trails, picnicking, and exploring the unique ecosystem. It also includes the historic White Pines Inn, offering rustic cabins and a restaurant, providing a charming escape. So give us a thumbs up if you have visited this state park. Have we had anyone visit this one? Oh, I see some. Awesome. All right. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and have a wonderful short week.